colleague of mine, Dr. Emil Kakkis, a entrepreneur, scientist above all else, clinician, and considered thinker on matters of rare diseases and orphan drug policy. So I leave you.
Thank you, Tim, and also thanks to the representatives Lance and Crowley for opportunity to speak today. I spent probably 20 years now working on rare disease drug development as an academic originally at BioMarin, and in fact developed 3 approved therapies there and put several others into development. So very experienced in the process of doing this. And although there have been many successes and certainly a number of rare disease programs have received approval, I've also noted a number of the challenges of getting some of these rare diseases treated, including diseases like Niemann-Pick C and rare cancers, as spoken by the prior panelist. I think the challenge is that when you have a disease like Matthew here, it's so rare that it's just very hard to get any movement from either investment to really push this forward. Now, Matthew has a disease which was treated successfully in animals in 1993. It's been repeated many, many times. It's very reliable. In fact, there's other diseases like this that have already been treated, but he's not treated because his disease is so rare, there's just no way to get the system to work and to do the kind of studies required that would be so costly that it hasn't rated any interest in investment. And every week I get calls from parents like Matthew who have been, as I say, hit with genetic lightning, shocked by a finding that their kid has some unpronounceable disease, and now they have to suddenly become scientist, researcher, and also biotech executive in order to make anything happen, and that shouldn't be. And I think there's a lot more we could do. And so I founded the EveryLife Foundation for Rare Diseases really to focus on trying to improve the process, not just to let anything get through, but to do sound, scientifically good decisions that would help improve how we invest in development for rare diseases and make the process more predictable. Now, the Food and Drug Administration has approved a number of treatments for rare disease, and they have shown significant flexibility at times. But I think what's critical to understand is that flexibility alone is not enough. What we need is a certain amount of predictability, and I think that is where there's some improvement could happen. Many of the treatment strategies now are based on regulatory precedents and other disorders, and I think that we need to develop better ways to attack diseases as rare as Matthew's. Now, this year, I think last year, there's been 2 products for ultra-rare disorders that affect less than 6,000 U.S., and if you look through the last 12 years, maybe 2 to 3 products a year approved for ultra-rare, which is about 85% of the rare diseases. And while that's good and good for those 2 diseases, the truth is at that rate, it will take us 150 years or so to even do half of the diseases that are out there. So it's an extremely slow rate, and that means a lot of people waiting, even though there may be billions of value in NIH research invested that hasn't really been translated. So what I think we need to do is do better and figure out ways to improve what we're doing in the process. And I think we can do a lot more with the science that we already have and turn our investment in research into more therapeutics. Now, one of the things that's important to know is that there have been significant regulatory changes in the past that have made impact. Next slide. And that's the accelerated approval regulation, which came in 1992, when the FDA, basically because of the pressure with the AIDS organizations, came up with a plan to use markers, this is like a blood test or a urine test, to approve a product if it was reasonably likely to predict clinical benefit. And this is in the middle of the AIDS crisis, where we didn't have time, 5 to 7 years, all the patients who were out there were already be dead before the next drug would come out. And in that time, there's been a number of drugs in the HIV and the cancer field approved via accelerated approval. It's been really enormously successful. And the FDA has had some criticism over this program, but I would say is one of their most successful after the Orphan Drug Act in terms of getting cutting-edge therapy through. But not everyone's benefiting. And if you are a rare disease, accelerated approval hasn't really helped you. The genetic case, there's only been 1 approval in the first 16 years, even though there's hundreds of diseases which might benefit. And while there have been a couple approvals a year over the last decade, it hasn't been enough. So on the next slide, we show what happens in the HIV area. So 92, the rules changed, and you could get a blood test marker. In the coming 16 years, there were 25 new chemical entity drugs, 4 combination drugs, 6 mechanisms of action, multiple startup companies, lots of biotech jobs, all generated and changing HIV from death sentence in 92. If you remember the crisis, everyone thought we're all going to die from HIV infection, and now a chronic managed disease. That's innovation happening. And that all happens because they changed so you can use a blood test to get approval. That small a change. So if we look at what we could do in genetic disease and make that same policy change more accessible to the rare disease space, and what will happen then is you'll get more companies saying, well, if that process, that regulatory pathway is more predictable, then I'm willing to invest the money because then I know what my costs are and it will end up making more sense. And instead of having government investment, you will have, there's billions of dollars of other money out there that would invest again. And they're not investing right now in startup biotech. They're not investing in preclinical data from universities. All that stuff is just sitting there now. They're not willing to take the risks. But we changed the policy, just like was in HIV, and improve it for rare diseases. We think you can do tremendous things in terms of expanding the amount of investment. We published a paper I recommend you look at, just showing a careful financial calculation of how much benefit it would be. And what we are saying there is you would get 3 times as many drugs developed for the same investment. With $1 billion invested, 36 drugs developed, rather than what would right now cost, you'd probably only get maybe 10 to 11 drugs. So a very big effect. So we think there's much more that could be done. We think that improvement of the accelerated approval pathway would be one of the ways to do it, and we're advocating the fast track ultra orphan, which is just simply to help improve the policy around accelerated approval so that we can get that same effect that they got in HIV. So I have to stop now, but thank you.
Thank you, Sam. Before I introduce my last speaker, I'd just like to convey my apologies because I'll have to leave shortly thereafter for the airport. I also like to convey the apologies of Drs. Groff and Harriser, who had government meetings that they had to return to. They welcome any further inquiries from, you can contact Ms. Diane Dorman, who's back there pointing to herself and waving her hand, at the Nord office, our policy vice president. She can help convey any further follow-up that you'd like to do with Drs. Harriser or Groff, and again, convey their apologies. Mr. Warren Holmes represents Sigma-Tau Pharmaceutical, which I have found to be the quintessential orphan drug biotech right here in River City, right up 270 actually, is where they're located. And I will let him, any presentation here would be incomplete without representation of industry. Sigma-Tau is a great choice for that representation. Please.
Well, thank you very much, and thanks again to the Rare Disease Caucus, NORD, and RDLA. We're right up the street. We're a small company, about 200 people, but we have a big impact. Our medicines, of which we have 8, are primarily focused on rare diseases, and they improve the health of about 75,000 people and save the lives of about 25,000 people. So each one of our people, basically every day, has a hand in saving a life. That's what we're about. We only focus on rare diseases. That's all we do. That's all we've ever done. We only focus on rare diseases that have unmet medical needs. Well, as you can see, that's not hard to do when 97% of all rare diseases have no treatment whatsoever. We also look for high medical value, meaning it's a life-saving medicine or saves an organ, so it has a high impact. The important thing to know about us is we've been in business about 30 years. You can count probably on one hand how many companies like us focused on rare diseases have been in business that long. You've just heard a number of reasons why that's hard to do. Developing a medicine for a rare disease is extraordinarily difficult. Let me give you an example. We're working on a disease right now, 100 people worldwide. It has an assured mortality of a 15-year-old. So any child who gets the disease dies by the age of 15. We just recently understood the genes that actually affect this disease. We then found out that there's maybe a molecule out there that can help, a compound. We then said, okay, let's synthesize this thing. Too costly, takes too long. Let's go find out if there's a natural occurring substance. Serendipity. We found one in a remote forest halfway around the world. That process, we have now identified a disease, how it works, and potentially a compound that can work on it. What's the chance that that thing will actually make it to the FDA, get approved, and actually make its money back? And this is a number you might want to put in your head. The chance of that succeeding is 0.0000001%. 0.25%. 1 in 40,000. Let me put that in perspective for you. Everybody in this room, you have twice a better chance of becoming a professional athlete than we do of having that medicine get approved and actually make back its investment. It's extraordinarily difficult. Why is it so difficult? First, it's often a genetic basis behind this disease. You have to tease out what that actual mechanism of action is, and it's a torturous process, confounding variables, dead-end pathways. Very tough. Second, it's really hard to make these things. These are generally very large molecules. They're brutish, they're temperamental. And even though we've been working on these things for years, every day we have issues that come up in the manufacturing of these molecules. If you have children in high school, you understand how careful you have to be so that they actually operate effectively day to day. That's what we face every day with our molecules. They are very difficult. There are many other things. And again, there's a very rare instance of these things. So just trying to develop a medicine for a rare disease is extraordinarily challenging. Now, there are things we can do about this, and you've heard a number of them here. First and foremost is patient involvement. As we heard, I believe it was Hannah, they don't even have a name for her disease yet. What we can do is through registries, through natural histories, and testing and things like that, we can find out who has these diseases. The NIH is perfectly suited for this task. Other academic institutions, by having better testing, we can find those linkages, because what you'll find, this disease and this disease and this disease may have a general genetic basis that you can link them together and suddenly a puzzle. You put in that last piece of a puzzle, you now have a chance for a medicine that has an impact. Okay? Second, we have to basically improve. The FDA has done a really good job being flexible. You heard about that earlier. NORD has recently, did a study on this, and the FDA is trying to apply flexibility to the process, but it's not codified anywhere. As a manufacturer, you're sitting there going or an investor looking to start up a company for rare disease, you have to ask yourself, what's my chance of success? Well, we really don't understand what the regulatory pathway might be. The sense that can be codified to a degree and add additional surrogate endpoints like Dr. Kakkis was talking about, that would help an investor have a greater sense of confidence that there's a chance for success at this medicine, and more investment will follow that. Okay? Other things that we can do. Let's just see here. You've heard about a lot of things about the incentives behind the Orphan Drug Act. That was passed in 1983. One of our medicines is one of the first approved many number of years ago. But the incentives behind the Orphan Drug Act have not been, have not been updated in 20 to 30 years. The value of those things has been reduced substantially. It's time for you, and many people in this room, a lot of you staffers can talk to your Congress people and say, there are things on the Hill today that can help improve the incentives by which we can further propel the development of rare disease medicines. Also, we can avert drug shortages. You heard from Chris that here's a medicine out there that could possibly help, but nobody's willing to manufacture it. Why? The costs of manufacturing are extraordinary. But if a medicine is used, you can only increase the price of medicine by inflation. And half the medicines, as you found out, are used in pediatrics. Well, recently, in the recent legislation, that pricing construct for the government has been passed to hospitals that take care of children. That's well and good. But in orphan diseases, the problem is if you can't raise the price of your medicine, you can't recoup your investment. Therefore, you are not going to go after those drugs to try to keep them on the market. You can have a shortage. So we don't do those things. What happens? There's good news, bad news. Good news is we will solve every rare disease, as Dr. Kakkis pointed out. But at the current rate of development, all those rare diseases, the last one to be treated will be the year 3000. That'll be your great-grandchild times 40. All right, so our incentive today is to push the development. Now, for us today, the good news is you have a lot of companies trying to work on this. There could be a lot more if we put in additional incentives and make the marketplace better. And now I'm really being told to get moving along. So let me just leave this for you. My father-in-law is a stand-up comedian. He said, even when you fall flat on your face, you still move forward. So basically, when we go through what we go through, we fall on our face a lot. We can fall on our face a lot less often if we have some of these incentives built in. We can make an environment better to propel things. But remember this, every time we fall flat on our face, we did move it forward. Each time we work on a medicine, even if we fail, we learn something. We're getting closer to hope for those patients who have no hope today. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I hope you all will be involved about the process. With a shared perspective. perspectives. I think we've been very successful in reviewing the scope of the 30,000-foot vision of what are rare diseases and orphan drugs today. Obviously, we did not have time to go into everything that all these panelists have had to offer. They've only had very brief glimpses of time to express what's going on in this community. But I thank you for your time, for your patience, and especially indebted to my fellow panelists. Thank you so much.